I'm Sophie Alcorn. I'm the founder of Alcorn Immigration Law, host of the Sophie Alcorn podcast, and a columnist at TechCrunch. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here today. We're going to be covering how companies can create a supportive and great work environment to bring out the best in their teams and provide sponsorship opportunities that will allow you to recruit and retain the world's top talent. And I'm joined by my colleague, the amazing attorney, Linda Haggerty. Linda's been doing corporate immigration for a couple decades now and leads our legal team at Alcorn. So thanks for being here with me today, Linda.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Sophie.
Great. Well, we have a lot to cover today. Our team has been very busy with H-1B season and helping lots of companies and entrepreneurs and professionals get their visas and green cards. And it's been a very interesting season with USCIS because we've seen a lot of changes. And some of that we're going to be talking about, but that's been keeping you on your toes and our team, right, Linda? Because there's so much to learn.
Yes, very fluid. There's always something new, it seems, every week.
Yes. It's that time of year. So let's get into it. We will gladly accept your questions in the Q&A panel. Please be mindful that unless you're logged into Zoom or choose to put your name as anonymous, we're going to see your name. So you're welcome to ask whatever you want, but it's not confidential. And we'll get to as many questions as we can. And the sooner you put your questions in the Q&A panel, the better we can allocate our time to make sure we have a chance to answer everything within today's session. Okay, so, and we will be sending this recording to everybody, and we are available for consultations. And the critical thing to note is that if you want to put people in this year's H-1B lottery, our pricing is going to go up in 11 days at Alcorn. So if you're, and we'll talk about what that entails, but if you want our help, please contact us now, and we would love to support you. We still have capacity, but 11 days from now, when our pricing goes up, we'll also have to reassess our capacity. Okay. Linda, what do you think some of the best practices are when you're counseling human resources and people operations folks at startups or larger companies? How can they craft the best company immigration policy that really inspires great, talented people to work there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, having a structured policy does help a company. A new startup company is growing very rapidly, and sometimes they aren't in a position to have that much structure. So it's something that might evolve over time. And when you reach that point, when you're ready to have more structure, it's nice to have a milestone in there for when you'll start green card sponsorship, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, just for retention purposes too.
And just depending on the market, there's been some crazy times in the last few years in the tech ecosystem. I mean, we've had at one point in maybe the pandemic, but there was such a talent shortage that candidates were able to negotiate green card sponsorship before hiring. And companies even started in parallel with the H-1B lottery. So that's great. We're always happy to help. I think the market's a little bit different right now. But certainly having that clear milestone for like, look, you got selected in the lottery and then we get you your H-1B and then 6 months later, we'll assess if we're ready to start the green card process for you. It's like good clarity, whatever milestone you set, it's good clarity for everybody to have.
I agree, but one other thing to think about is if you have someone that already is an H-1B status and they're transferring to your company and we do that assessment, one of the things we're trying to figure out is how much H-1B time do they have left? Because sometimes you are going to have to start that process really quickly. So it's good to get that immigration assessment done so you know where they are in their 6-year H-1B timeline.
Yeah. So for the right candidate where there's an urgency, it may be part of your policy is, look, if you're doing an H-1B transfer and you don't yet have a priority date, we're willing to do your green card to gets you those unlimited H-1B extensions if we hit the milestones. So great. Okay. Oops. Let's take a look at the perspective from recruiters, because a lot of people are recruiting recent graduates. What are some of the main tools that most people in the technology world are familiar with when it comes to H-1Bs and sponsoring?
So, in terms of like looking at the F1 student population, do you mean from that perspective?
Yeah, I think that a lot of international candidates tend to have gotten a US college degree or master's degree, and now
Mhm.
they're looking for a role at US companies. And I think it's a little bit more accessible for human resources and recruiters to access that talent pool rather than engineers that are potentially in other countries right now and haven't come here yet. So yeah, what are the options for when people can work coming out of college or grad school?
Yeah, so when you graduate from a bachelor's or master's program or PhD, when a foreign national hits one of those levels, they'll get automatic work authorization. So they'll get a 1-year work authorization card and they just have to work for an employer in their field. So there's a lot of flexibility, or they could have their own startup. And then if they have graduated from a STEM program and they're working for an E-Verify company, then they get another 2 years of work authorization. So that's nice to kind of see that if you can get those full 3 years and then in the background be seeking the H-1B lottery so that you can hold on to that person longer term is a great strategy.
Yeah. And a lot of what we're going to be talking about today is the lottery and how it works. We'll be talking about green cards, how to sponsor them. We'll also discuss other visas besides the H-1Bs. So we'll be including a lot of these things in today's presentation. So let's kick it off with the H-1B. Super popular. Everybody writes about it. Everybody complains about it. What is it? Who qualifies? Why would a company use it?
Yeah, so it's an employer-sponsored work visa for a foreign national. It's for a specific job with a specific company, and it does have to meet certain criteria. The job has to be a US job. The position has to be a professional job or a specialty occupation requiring a degree. The candidate has to have credentials. Generally, it's going to be education that align with the job. And then there's a government prevailing wage requirement that attaches. So those are all sort of the key concepts when we look at an H-1B.
Okay, great. And hopefully we'll have more updates on this soon, but there is this new change in December from USCIS, which says that the old rules around the employer-employee relationship are out and they're applying modern corporate law principles. So basically, if you have a company and you're going to go on payroll, even if you own the majority of the equity as a founder, we could put you in this year's H-1B lottery now for your first H-1B. It's very exciting.
Exciting, yeah. It's a big shift.
What's that?
It's a very big shift, I would say. I mean, we've been moving in that direction, but it's
Yeah.
so interesting to see it in black and white. We've been testing the waters with cases for sure.
Yeah. And a few years ago, it was like, well, you need to be the CTO or you need a 3-member board and to dilute your equity below 50%. And those types of concessions have been so painful for founders to make, especially at that early stage. So this is going to be really helpful to a lot of people. So basically, if you have a brand new startup, we can put you in the lottery. We should start immediately. But you could put as many people as you want in the lottery this year, even if it's a brand new company. So, what's your prediction? Okay, well, maybe before we go into predictions, what are some of the basics of how this lottery works?
Yeah, so it's an annual, I hate to use the word quota, but it's essentially a quota or a cap of H-1B numbers that are released, um, in the span of the federal fiscal year. So it's 85,000 that are issued on April 1 with a start date of October 1. And to apply for your first H-1B, because there's such a high demand for those 85,000 numbers, there's a lottery system. So that's why we keep saying lottery, lottery. So we'll talk a lot about it today, but in past years, because of the demand, we've seen the selection rate fall between 20 and 25%.
Yeah.
Um, I think what's really exciting is that we have some new regulations that have just gone into effect, which are going to make the process a little more fair and give
Mhm.
everyone one chance, because in the past, a beneficiary has been able to get dozens of employers to sponsor them to, vastly improve their odds of selection. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens this year.
Yeah, but I think from a company perspective, um, people before, and it mattered a lot to small businesses and early stage startups, but they were getting burned because they would go out on a limb to put somebody in the lottery, but then it turned out that person had 5 other entries and ended up quitting and going somewhere else. And that's painful when you're an early stage company. So with this whole like one human, one chance situation, hopefully it's going to help companies have better odds for their team and also better retention. So overall, better. So there have been a lot of changes in the last 2 weeks on H-1Bs. Can you give us the lay of the land about some of the things USCIS is doing right now?
Yeah, so they're basically bombing us with changes. I mean, it's a constant thing, but the latest change I think that's really important for registration, not only this beneficiary centric process, but the whole registration process is changing as well. They're kind of uprooting the system and modifying it and creating different style accounts for the company to, basically do the electronic registration for attorneys. So there's a lot of restructuring happening in the process, and they're still haven't rolled this out yet. So we're just getting bits and pieces of information. So I'm happy to jump in and share what we know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's gonna make, I think overall their idea is to get uh is to move towards electronic filings. So ultimately it's better for everybody. We use less paper, faster responses, everything centralized, better communication tools, tracking. But yeah, I mean, in prior years, there's been clarity at this time of year as to how to navigate the process, a familiar technology tool. We know when the online portal is opening, but even attorneys and the American Immigration Lawyers Association were still learning because they're still, I mean, basically they're still building it, right? And they
Yeah.
have this deadline in like 3 weeks or I don't know what, but it's got to get launched and it's still being built.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting because it's going to be restructured so that it'll be more collaborative too. So we'll have that
Mhm.
online filing, but companies can create a group account and they can identify
Yeah, can
people.
you describe that? Like, what is this company group concept that we're now going to see?
Yeah, I mean, I think visually for me, I think of it as like a pyramid. So the administrator, and it sounds like you can have more than one, will be sort
Mhm.
of like the key holder to the account. That's the person that has the most authority and kind of controls the account. So that would be someone signing off on an H-1B petition.
Okay.
And then within that, the company can designate other group members. So if there's other HR team members or other departments involved, they can have some access as well. So it'll be a nice way that you could have more people involved and more information sharing.
Great. And then we'll have visibility to work with our clients and see all of their beneficiaries, and there'll be a lot more transparency, I think.
Yeah, and I think that the cumbersome electronic handshake process is supposed to be going away, and that's where we'd have to like get on a call with our client, walk them through this portal, and they'd, travel through screens and screens and screens. 10 minutes later, they just hit submit. So hopefully that will be gone, and
That'll
it'll
be
be a much
great.
easier process.
Okay, and what are some of those upcoming dates for when this will roll out and then when people need to do their registrations?
Yeah, I mean, so we're being told by USCIS that the end of February, I think I've heard February 28th is when the new system will roll out. USCIS is having a series of what they call tech talks,
Mhm.
and they're doing it every Monday. So we've been signing up for those and participating and getting as much information as we can. So that's the latest. I mean, I think the really important rollout is this online filings. So
Right.
H-1B season is going to look very different after people are selected. So we're really excited about that.
That'll be great. And that'll be for the actual petitions for the people who got selected in the lottery starting in April.
Exactly. And then it sounds like it's going to expand to other H-1Bs as well. So for someone that's a transfer or an extension, they can still use that process.
Very exciting. Okay, so here's our overview of the important dates for this year. So this is definitely one to screenshot for your records. Can you walk us through the whole timeline for this calendar year, please?
Sure. Yeah, so the date is not certain yet, but those new portals are going to be opening up sometime, hopefully in late February for the companies and then our attorney accounts as well. And then there's a period between March 6th and 22nd where we're actively submitting and entering the registrations. So we'll work and collaborate with our clients to make sure their candidates are enrolled, and we'll be submitting them over that time period. And then after March 22nd, sometime between March 22nd and April 1st, it's like we never really know when that's going to
It can
happen.
be a
But
weekend, it can be a night, it can be a
yeah,
day.
all of a sudden our inbox just like explodes with all these emails from USCIS. So,
Yeah.
by April 1, we'll know who was selected. And
Mm,
so we can log into the portal and see. So that's exciting.
great, okay. And then forever it was accepted, then we have until June 30th to file the full H-1B, and then that first available start date is always going to be October 1st. And if somebody's getting a visa from another country, they can come in 10 days earlier. We might see some change. We'll talk a little bit about cap gap. There might be some changes there too for people whose student work permit, their last student work permit is expiring. But this is kind of the overall timeline. So basically, whoever you want to have a chance for working at your company in October, now is this amazing opportunity to have a chance. And the H-1B visas are pretty great in general because you could just be like a good, hardworking, normal professional and qualify. You don't have to be some like famous rocket scientist, startup founder type person. So it's very accessible for lots of different levels of professional talent, including people right out of college. So
Yeah,
super.
and lots of occupations. I think we always think about tech, but it's really broad. We can do
Yeah.
engineers, we can do architects, financial
Lawyers,
services.
accountants,
Yeah.
maybe medical professionals that have the right licensing, um, project managers, there's all sorts of roles that can qualify.
Hmm.
Okay, and so we've kind of gone through this, but let's talk about the fees because these are also in flux. When do people pay the government filing fees, and what is going on with the fees right now?
Yeah, so another change, everything in terms of the timeline, we talked about that 30-day submission period if you're selected. And when you're filing the petition, ideally online, we will have to pay USCIS filing fees. The first filing fee is paid at the registration. That's the $10. And Alcorn just covers that as part of our service, because that's pretty nominal. But the actual USCIS filing fees have increased. And so we're giving you sort of the range depending upon the number of
Like a
employees.
brand new startup, their first employee, if that person gets selected in the lottery and they want to proceed, about $2,000 would be due if you're not using premium processing in April, essentially, whenever you're ready to file. Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
Do
And
you have
then if you,
any insight into like the e-filing and how they're going to do credit card processing and if the companies can pay directly or how that's going to work? Any guesses there?
I mean, what I've heard so far is that it's still going to sit with the attorney to do that
Okay.
submission and payment. And there will be some discounts. So these fees might not reflect the like nominal $50 discount they offer for online filings. Um,
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we'll see how that all rolls out because that could also play in here and drop those fees just a little bit.
And they didn't actually change. I think before it was like 1710 for a brand new little company. So they
Mhm.
didn't actually change those fees, but they like added in an asylum fee.
Yeah, so I think, they added on this like $600 asylum fee for larger companies if, they're trying to kind of get a hold of the asylum system. And so I don't know, I think there could be a government challenge to this. I think there's a lot of like rumblings about injunctions, and so we'll see what happens come April 1.
Okay. And then premium processing, are those fee changes a little bit more certain?
Yes, and those actually go into effect on February 26th. So that fee has bumped up from 2,500 to 2,805, and the
Okay.
timeline is going to change. So we always say 15 calendar days, but now it's going to be 15 business days.
Okay. which is actually something the Trump administration invented, but now the Biden administration's doing it. So that's interesting. But it means that instead of, like, if you file something on February 1st, instead of getting a decision by February 16th, you're gonna get a decision 3 weeks later, so maybe February 22nd-ish, something like that, because they're just counting the Mondays through Fridays. But then the
Yeah.
holidays maybe give them even more
Yeah.
room.
I mean, my hope is that by doing this, that they can actually expand premium processing to more case types. Because if they extend the processing time, that's my hope. We'll see what happens.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay, okay, fingers crossed, that'd be cool. Okay. And then I'll just mention this briefly. We've done this for a lot of people. There are ways to get H-1Bs without the lottery. And in our, winter, spring webinar series, we're gonna go more into depth in this one in April, because it really helps people who are not selected in the lottery and need a backup. But let's say you need somebody to start in March, end of March, or beginning of April or something. That would be really tight, but we could try to do it. And they're in another country and you want to get them an H-1B in the lottery right now, and we'll put them in, but you can't afford to have them wait till October to come here. We could theoretically get them a H-1B for 6 months now. And that would be through this CAP exempt program. And we work with this, we've referred many clients to an organization called Open Avenues that has served them well so far. And that's to get a part-time H-1B without the lottery, to work like 5 hours a week at a nonprofit that doesn't have to put people in the lottery to hire them, because they're affiliated with an educational mission. And basically they do a lot of STEM project learning opportunities for US underserved diverse college student population. So it's a really great way to increase the company's talent pipeline, but also get people in the US sooner. And Linda, what's your take on that? I know we're always doing these types of cases here and there. I think it has to be the right match, right? Because it's a significant investment that's greater than the lottery.
Yeah.
So maybe for the right, like, founding engineer who can't get an O1 or something, like maybe there's certain situations where it's urgent and important for the person to be here.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's definitely a hard to fill position and it's an exceptional candidate, we see companies jump on this option because they need this person no matter what.
Yeah.
In the meantime, we still do the lottery with the hope that we can convert them over to a cap subject H-1B, which would reduce some of the costs, because there are some costs associated with OAF.
Yeah. And you don't have to use OAF. You could have somebody working at a university part-time as a researcher, and then we could do a second H-1B alongside that. But there just has to be that initial cap exempt, which means no lottery, H-1B for us to piggyback onto. And then the person has to be teaching or doing that other duty the entire time they want to work in a private company.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that kind of leads us into this transition of, like, how do we support recent graduates? And you alluded to this before. So there's several ways for people to work at a company before they graduate. And if HR people have employees or interns who are currently on curricular practical training, or pre-completion OPT, or post-completion regular OPT, or STEM OPT, we really recommend putting them in the lottery every year. If somebody's about to graduate in June with a bachelor's or master's, you can put them in the lottery right now, actually. So we recommend doing that to help people get that extra chance. And, there's a variety of other things you can do to support those candidates. If somebody was not born in India or China, you could theoretically get them a green card by the time they're done with their STEM OPT. And if they're not seeking to travel internationally, you could maybe just navigate that whole process from F1 OPT and STEM OPT without even getting accepted in the lottery. And there's a variety of other visas that we help companies get for people as well: O1, TN, E3, H-1B1. What do you think about these topics, Linda, and how companies can support their recent graduates?
I think just being really cognizant of the timeline is important, right?
Mhm.
So, we want to look at when will they qualify to go into the H-1B lottery. So I think a lot of people have the misconception that you can't sponsor someone unless they're actively working for you. So that's not really the case. If you're recruiting someone and they're going to be joining you in July or June when their OPT starts, you could still put them into the lottery because it's not going to be effective until October. But I think just really being mindful of that timeline so that you can optimize their chances of being selected and ensure there's not going to be a gap in their employment with you.
Yeah. Okay, great. And then let's talk about the basic educational requirements for an H-1B. What do you typically have to show?
Yeah, I mean, so the core requirement for the H-1B is that the role is a specialty occupation. And the definition of that is that, the role requires a specialized body of knowledge that one would obtain through a bachelor's program. So that's kind of what we're looking for. So if you have someone that hasn't quite earned the bachelor's degree, but they're going to before that 90-day filing window ends, there may be an opportunity to still enroll them in the lottery just as long as the degree is completed and they meet that specialty occupation requirement before June 30th.
Yeah. And some people are like, well, the H-1B wage is higher than I'm currently paying. Is that a problem? And I mean, I think it's fine, right? The wage doesn't kick in until the person's has an approved H-1B and they're in the US and it's after October 1st and they're in H-1B status. So you don't
Yeah,
have to pay the H-1B wage yet.
exactly. And we'll talk about later in the slide, some people even wait to activate that H-1B.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes students want to avoid paying FICA taxes because once you go from OPT to H-1B, then you'll have to pay FICA. So sometimes people like to extend the time in their OPT.
Yeah. And how do we get somebody so there's a better chance of being selected in the lottery if somebody has a master's degree. So what if somebody's about to graduate this spring? How do we navigate that, Linda?
Yeah, as long as the US master's degree or higher will be received before June 30th, they would fall under the US master's cap numbers. So that 85,000 pool that we talked about earlier, they do set aside 20,000 for people with US masters or higher US degrees. So they get a higher chance of being selected because they essentially, when the registration's done, they'll pull 20,000 people from the US masters, and then those people go back into the regular pool and then they'll pull 65,000. So I don't know. I wonder what the stats are, Sophie, for selection rate for bachelor's versus master's. I've never really seen any data on that.
We've had some internal data and it's usually several percentage points higher. So I don't recall last year specifically, but in prior years, it was like, well, if there was a 25% bachelor's rate, then our firm like had a 33% master's rate or like
Yeah,
20 to
that sounds
28%,
about right.
something like
Yeah.
that. It's definitely an extra boost. And I feel like our firm has a higher than average selection rate, but it's not because we're brilliant. I mean, we are, but that's not why in this scenario. It's because we tend to work with a lot of emerging and critical technology companies that are selecting candidates that have master's degrees and PhDs. And those candidates, because of that educational background, have a higher rate. So in the past, it's like, oh, we got a lot of people selected. This is amazing. And then we find out the national average and it's like, oh, but I think it's just because of the caliber.
Yeah.
Okay, so cap gap. I guess the most succinct way I have to explain this is if somebody's OPT, if somebody's at the very end of their OPT or STEM OPT, whatever they can qualify for, and it's gonna run out before October, how do we keep them here?
Mhm.
And like if somebody went to law school, they're only going to get 1 year of regular OPT. But if somebody got an MBA or a computer science degree, they're going to qualify for the STEM OPT 2-year extension. So they're going to get that additional. So it's like whenever your last possible work permit is ending, that's where the candidate might need cap gap. So how does somebody qualify for, how does a company make sure they can keep somebody working here in that situation where their work permit's going to end?
Yeah, if that individual whose work permit, let's say in the example you're giving that expires in, June, and they have been selected in the lottery, and they don't have any OPT extensions available to them. That's it. The nice thing is once the H-1B petition is filed and the receipt notice is issued by USCIS, they can use that receipt notice to get an auto work extension. And that work extension is now going to run through April 1, 2025. So that's a change. Yeah.
And I think that will be finalized in this second coming soon H-1B regulation, because they just piecemealed it out and they had the giant proposed one in fall. They didn't do 90% of the stuff. They did the stuff about the lottery 2 weeks ago, and they alluded to like one more H-1B regulation is coming. So I think this will be part of that one. And we really don't recommend travel if somebody's in the US on cap, just stay put.
Yeah.
And that leads us to travel and filing options. Should you travel? When and why? So, okay, we've got changes of status and we've got their travel consequences, and we also have consular processing. So, what is a change of status and who can qualify?
So if you're in the US in a valid non-immigrant status and you've been selected under the lottery, at the time the petition's filed, if you still have that valid status, then you can apply for a change of status, meaning USCIS will essentially extend your stay while you're in the US when the H-1B is approved, and you'll get a new I-94 card. So you can just stay put in the US. Even if you don't have a visa stamp in your passport, it doesn't matter. You can remain here and your status will become effective on October 1.
Okay, great. And now, if you've chosen a change of status, but then something comes up, oh my gosh, my best friend's getting married, they want me to be in their wedding, or oh, my family really needs me, I have to take an emergency trip home. First of all, talk to our team before anybody leaves the country. But any general guidance about, if travel is necessary, when it might be possible?
Yeah, and I mean, I think a big part of like our role too, if somebody's selected, we will do sort of an analysis and say, look, this is a 90-day filing period. Do you have any travel plans this summer? So we can be strategic and file the petition for change of status when they come back into the US. But it's really important to note that you can't travel while a change of status petition is pending, because you're going to abandon that request to change status. So there are some consequences. So I think just being really mindful of alerting your counsel of any travel plans and strategizing that, just to make sure that.
And we've had people where they were in cap and they had to travel for like a family emergency or something. And, we just laid it out. Like, if this happens, you're probably not coming back on F1. So we're going to have to premium process your H-1B, and you're going to have to go get a visa interview, a visa in your passport to come back in. So it's decisions like that that everybody needs to be on board with. Okay, and then how does it work if you're getting a visa in another country after the lottery? Oh, I think Linda might be having some internet connectivity issues. So I will speak to that, and then we'll see when she's able to join me again. So basically, whether you're inside the US or outside the US, you can seek a visa in your passport from a consulate or a US embassy in your home country, or maybe any other countries in which you have residence. So you need an approved H-1B petition. We can use premium processing to get that sooner. And then once the candidate has that approval, we can support them to apply for a visa interview at their consulate. And these were very, very backlogged in COVID, but we've seen dramatic improvements. There's several consulates that have a mail-in process, so you don't even need to go to a physical interview in certain circumstances. But ultimately, there might be an interview and you need a visa in your passport, and then the person is able to enter the US up to 10 days before the October 1st start date. So that's what we'll do if your candidates are outside the US. Remember, you don't need a US college education to qualify for an H-1B. So if you have great contractors in Brazil or in Thailand or something, and you want to try to bring people to the States, then you can absolutely put them in the lottery and see if they get selected. But in general, if somebody's in the US, we haven't really recommended consular processing in that initial summer because there have been visa appointment delays. People can get stuck in administrative processing, which is kind of like it can just slow down everything and you can get stuck outside the United States. So we've been trying to avoid it. We want to de-risk things for our clients' employees where we can. And then the other thing that's happening right now, and I'm not sure if we have a slide on this, but they're doing a mail-in H-1B stamping pilot program in the US. So in certain circumstances, like H-1B renewals, they're testing it out where people will mail in their passports after an online application, and then they'll send them back with a visa in it. And that would totally avoid the need to go like back to India to get an H-1B stamp in your passport if you need to go on a business trip to London. So that would be amazing. And so we're hoping that this pilot program will be successful and then that the Biden administration will roll it out formally for not only H-1Bs and new H-1Bs, but other types of work visas like the O-1 and the L-1. But in the summer, that would be the hope and plan. I do also want to mention some work visa alternatives, and these are great ways to sponsor your team members now. There are certain visas that only apply to citizens of certain countries, the H-1B one, the TN, and the E3. Now, also the E2 and the E1. It doesn't matter what country somebody was born in. So if somebody born in India moved to Australia, now they have an Australian passport, they could get an E3. If somebody born in China moved to Canada and now they have a Canadian passport, they could get a TN. So there's many alternative work visas that can be great for talent. Hi, Linda, welcome back.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. I was just explaining that there are a variety of work visas for professionals, in addition to the H-1B lottery. They have various advantages and disadvantages compared to the H-1B. The biggest advantage is there's no lottery. The biggest disadvantage is many of these require non-immigrant intent, which means that getting a green card is not possible, at least initially. And so we're working within those limitations. But if anybody you're putting in the lottery is from Chile, Singapore, Canada, Mexico, or Australia, we definitely want to flag that as they may have other short-term options that could be great. And then there's a variety of other visas as well. There's J1s for researchers, interns, trainees. That's nice because spouses get automatic work authorization. For a company that's majority owned by citizens or companies located in a country that has a treaty of a trade or investment with the US, we could get unlimited e-visas for all essential employees if there's enough investment or trade relationship. So that's great. So if it's like a German-owned startup in the Bay Area and you want to bring over 5 German software engineers, and the company is investing like $100,000 or $200,000 in the US Bay Area business, that would work. But there's no treaties for India, China, and Brazil and Russia. So keep that in mind. And then of course the O1, and we do O1s all the time for people. Founders, people early in their careers can definitely qualify, and companies sponsor a lot of scientists and researchers for O1s as well. So lots of alternatives. And then just chat about the green card here for a few minutes, and then we'll also go into questions. So, and I do see the first question in there, so that's great. And we'll talk more about F1s and the H-1B lottery. Linda, can you give us a high-level view, bird's eye view of the normal company-sponsored green card process, please?
Sure. So this is the PERM labor certification process. And, the first step of the process is, I think, where there's the most work and time. And the goal is to do a labor market test to prove there's not a qualified US worker. And that all runs through Department of Labor. And that can take up to 2 years sometimes just because of Department of Labor backlogs. And then the case shifts hands and goes to USCIS for steps 2 and 3. And the timeline can vary because sometimes there's an immigrant visa backlog for an individual. So that might mean it's you can't go right from step 2 to step 3. There's a wait. But essentially at the I-140 stage, you're showing that the beneficiary is qualified for the perm job and that the company can pay that wage that's required. And the final step is the same for anybody seeking a green card. It's just that adjustment of status, showing that you can change your status to permanent resident.
Great. We also have other types of green cards that kind of shorten this process because, I mean,
That's a
okay,
lot.
let's say, Linda, that somebody just got their first H-1B and the person was born in Japan and they're living in New York, and this company wants to do their green card for them, and they're starting for the very first time. And let's say they have a master's degree, so we're going to do EB2. How long do you think it's going to take from start to finish for that person to get their green card? 2 years, 4 years?
I would say between 3 and 4 years. I
Okay.
mean, we'd hope for 3, but it might go as long as 4.
Yeah, and part of that is really up to nobody's control. It just has to do with general macroeconomic trends and how many other companies are sponsoring people at the same time, which no company can really do anything about, but that kind of affects the availability of EB2 and EB3 category green cards. When your priority date's current, priority date would come from the perm process. So it's kind of a long journey, which is why most companies want to get people H-1Bs first, because then people can definitely travel in and out while they're waiting. And so a lot of companies do this. We support a lot of growing companies to retain talent through the green card. And then other times companies and beneficiaries are like, oh, I need a green card faster than that. That's not necessarily going to work for me. So we can look at other categories as well. So for example, the EB1A green card, this allows us to skip step 1 perm, and we just start at step 2. So we've therefore saved a year or more in the process. And this category has the least backlogs, regardless of country of birth. So if somebody was born in India or China, this is going to be their fastest path to a green card. EB2 NIW, also like the EB1A, you can skip the perm process, which is great. But now we're seeing rising backlogs for every country in the world for EB2 category green cards. So not as, if you're from, I don't know, Turkey or Egypt, it's not going to be as long of a wait as somebody from India or China, but you know, because of these waits, maybe it'll add an extra 6 to 12 months onto the green card process, but who knows? I'm kind of holding out hope that maybe after the election, they'll like recapture a lot of unused green cards through some administrative process and hopefully move the visa bulletin forward. But that's like my very wishful thinking. We'll see. I don't know.
And, I think there's still some mystery with the executive order and AI, and how that's one of the things they're trying to do is try to speed up the green card timeline. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it'll be really cool. Okay, and with that, we'll go to your questions. So we'll start with the first one. If anybody has any other questions, you're welcome to put them into the Q&A panel now. If there aren't any more, then we might end the webinar a few minutes early. So if you have a question, now is definitely the time to add it. So this question comes to us about F1 students pre-graduation. So somebody's asking if I complete my master's classes by March of 2024, can I ask my employer who gave me an offer to put me in the H-1B lottery, and do I need any proof? So I think this kind of scrambles a few different concepts. First of all, if you have an offer letter now, even if you're not going to graduate till May or June, definitely have your company put you in the H-1B lottery. And then if you want to get an extra boost in your chances of being selected based on your master's degree, it doesn't matter if you've completed the coursework. What we need is your diploma by June 30th. So it's pretty simple. Definitely be in the H-1B lottery. If you can get your diploma by June 30th, then when your employer puts you in the lottery, they can register to get you that extra boost. But if we do that, but then you don't graduate, we might not be able to get you an H-1B even if you're selected. So if you're very sure you're going to graduate, then we'll check that box. Okay. Somebody else is asking, like, this would be from a beneficiary perspective. How can I choose an employer in the US before the application starts? So Linda, maybe you could just share for a minute about what type of companies can qualify for H-1B sponsorship, please.
Yeah, I mean, so any US employer with a FEIN that's incorporated in the US and is actively doing business on some level could be an employer sponsor.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty broad. And we do have people that start their own companies. They're co-founder and they go into the lottery as a co-founder of their company. So that's another avenue to pursue.
Yeah, and you know, there's a lot of like consulting companies that will put people in the H-1B lottery. Sometimes people who really want to move to the US get jobs there. We don't really do like talent matching of candidates to jobs, but if you're just trying to work on your, and this webinar has been for employers, but if you are seeking to immigrate personally, there's a lot of ways to do it that are a little bit more less, that are for both employers and employees. Like the H-1B lottery is great because if you can get selected, it's really beneficial, but there's no reason to limit yourself to the H-1B if your goal is immigration, period. There's lots of alternative ways to get here that are a little bit more predictable. And then maybe our last question, for early stage startup founders who don't have high salaries, can equity be used for the H-1B salary requirement? Oh, I wish.
Yeah, I know that we haven't really caught up with the time. So they do look at your base salary or your rate of pay, but we have had some startup founders say, you know, I'm going to work part-time initially. So the rate of pay is $50 an hour. I'm going to do 20 hours. My company can pay me that. And then I can amend the petition when I'm ready to go full-time.
And like, even if your company is valued at $10 million and you own 50% of the shares, so theoretically you own a $5 million asset, it doesn't matter to the H-1B approvability. So like we can't use it. It's just the cash salary, which is kind of silly, but anyway, those are details that we work very closely with our clients on to ensure that they're putting their best steps forward and can meet their requirements of their business plan and their funding timeline and everything like that. Somebody's saying that they could potentially secure a role as a part-time teaching assistant by next January. And so they're asking if the university could put them into the H-1B lottery. That's an interesting question. I would say once again, okay, no, don't do it that way. It's a little bit different. Linda, could you explain why it's different for a university employee for H-1Bs? Oh, and they're clarifying that it's actually by May.
Yeah, I mean, so, you know, this kind of goes back to what we were talking about before about a cap exempt employer. So most universities and colleges are nonprofit, you know, institutions of higher learning, and so they get the special exemption from the lottery. So in order to get an H-1B, they don't have to go through the lottery. They can just sponsor someone. But then this opens up that opportunity to work for another employer. So once you have an H-1B, even if with a cap exempt organization like a part-time TA, then you could have a concurrent H-1B to work for any employer, and you wouldn't have to worry about the lottery.
But not every university is going to get an H-1B for all of their teaching assistants. So if you're going to do this, you know, talk to your faculty member, who's your point person, the department administrator, because if you're going to go be a teaching assistant to help your immigration, it really doesn't give you anything unless the university is willing to sponsor you for an H-1B. Now it's not going to have the lottery, as you mentioned, Linda, but they're still going to have to pay their lawyer and the filing fees and get you into their system as an employee. So they might not be willing to do that for everybody. But if you can get that either for 5 hours a week or 40 hours a week, then you could potentially have any employer do a second concurrent H-1B for you for 10 hours a week, 35 hours a week. And then that would allow your future company to avoid the lottery for you as long as you're still working at the university. So, you know, that might not make the most sense for you if you're just starting regular OPT and you have STEM OPT ahead of you. But if you want to maintain that good relationship with your university while you're looking for jobs in private industry, then maybe, you know, maintaining those relationships could help you for when your STEM OPT is ending if you haven't been selected into the lottery yet. So. Okay, well, that is the end of our session. Thank you so much, everybody, for attending. We would love to support you. So you're always welcome to reach out to us for an individual look at a beneficiary's qualifications, or to set up a new relationship with a company and get all of your team members into the lottery. We'd love to help you. You can always reach us at hello@alcorn.law or contact us through our website, www.alcorn.law, or you can always give us a ring on the old-fashioned telephone at 855-546-0015. So thank you so much for listening, everybody. And Linda, thank you so much for doing this H-1B webinar with me on sponsorship. Alex, thanks for all your help. And I hope you stay warm and dry with all the winds and weather that are happening. And I hope everybody has a great weekend.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.